Welcome to another episode of Artsy AF Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Norris.
Thanks for being here.
This week I had painter Michael Camarra on the podcast. Michael's work is incredible. Go check it out now before you get through the rest of this intro. He's using acrylic paint to boot, which makes all the subtle blending and details even more impressive. He currently has a piece in the Lore group show at Modern Eden, assuming that's going to be shown until the end of the month. And in this episode, we talk a little bit about Michael's story, how he became an artist, his process, the content of his work, which to me reads like scenes from the same movie or the same epic television series. And we talk about color palette and even a little bit of history thrown in there. I think you're going to enjoy it. And as always,
here's the pitch, y'all.
The Patreon pitch that I won't shut up about. First, I guess I should say that Patreon subscribers for this episode will get to see me bring Michael's work up on screen and us nerd out about it a bit. And you'll get a nice visual representation of what it is we're talking about in the moment. And that's just at the lowest tier, $4 a month. At the other tiers, $8, you have guest suggestions. $16, you got some merch on your way. That's every quarter you get a piece of merch, a small print, a coffee mug,
a sticker,
and a t-shirt. You want to support? I know you do. I know deep down you do. Maybe you don't have enough extra dough lying around to throw $4 per month. And that's okay. I totally get it. One thing you can do is to share one of your favorite episodes with several of your friends. I think that word of mouth promotion is the best kind. Trying to promote these days on social media is a little tough, you know, algorithms, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I do appreciate you for listening. I do, as always, appreciate you for being here and lending me your attention. That in itself is enough. But if you want to go above and beyond, the Patreon and sharing this out there in the world is super duper helpful. Let's get into this episode. I think y'all are going to love it. It's nearly 2 hours long. Side note here, for about the first 15, 16 minutes, Michael had AirPods in, and it kind of made the sound a little thin and tinny on his side, but eventually he takes those out and we are good to go from there. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Thank you again, Michael, for your time and your support of this podcast. Look forward to following your career, my friend. So here is Michael Camarra. Michael, very nice to meet you. Thanks for being on the podcast, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And since we're now recording, we were just talking like for about a minute before I started, but I want to give a shout out to Juan Sanabria who hooked us up. It's been, and I'll just restate what I just told you, but it's been really nice to kind of find this new vein of really dope artists that I didn't know about before. So yeah, big shouts to Juan. And yeah, again, really happy to have you, man. I am a big fan of your work now that I know about it. And yeah, man. Thank you. Yeah. I'm really glad that I was able to find you, or, you know, that Juan introduced me to you. And usually what I do is I start with the artist's backstory, more or less. And so I'd love to get your backstory and kind of be able to weave into it, like maybe some pivotal moments or influences, and then we'll talk about the work and the process and all that fun stuff. So one prompt I like to start with is, when you were growing up, were you a weird kid?
kind of, I guess. Like, I definitely hung out with weird kids, and then definitely in high school, like, I'd say, like, my group of friends was like, there's the whole cafeteria, and then there was like all of us in the corner, who were all into like, D&D and the metalheads and all of them. And that was kind of that was who I ran with, I think, at least at the end of high school. But yeah, kind of weird, sure.
Yeah. Did you spend a lot of time making art or drawing back then?
Yeah. Like one of those things, I was just talking to my mom about it recently, and she was just saying how, I never really wanted to get into sports. Like to this day, I'm like not into sports whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
I never even really liked going outside too much. I mean, like I did, but
Mm-hmm.
I mostly just kind of holed up, and then I would just draw all day. And like, summer vacation was kind of my favorite thing, because that was like where I probably like cultivated like my most unhealthy habit of like basically staying up till like 3 a.m. drawing.
Mm-hmm.
And like that was like my summer vacations, was just drawing as much as I possibly could.
Hell yeah.
And yeah, that was kind of my thing.
So are you a night owl still?
Yeah, which is really draining in my older age, because I'm like, it kicks my ass like nothing else. I'll like wake up in the morning and be like, oh, this feels like a hangover, except it wasn't as fun last night,
Yeah. I'm definitely feeling that too. I'm 36 now. Sometimes, is it weird? Do you ever forget your age for like a split second sometimes?
All the time now. All the time. I have to do the math. I'm like, I'm 30. Shit, I'm 38. Damn.
Yeah. I think it's the phenomenon of like time moving by so fast. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
You were telling people, I was telling people I was 34 a couple years ago, but a couple years ago sort of feels like 2 weeks ago at this point.
Like, I feel like I tried to cling as tenaciously as possible to my like mid 30s and be like, all right, now that I'm 38, I'm like, oh crap, I'm like late 30s.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been trying really hard not to get too sidetracked on this, but to become more of a morning person. But like even yesterday, so I was just, for whatever reason, I had a bout of insomnia like a night before last. Like couldn't fall asleep till like 3 and woke up at 6:30 because I had to take my girlfriend to work because her car was somewhere. And even last night, it took me a long time to fall asleep. I don't know why. I think there's something about the night, I feel like, that sort of unlocks creativity. Would you agree?
I feel like that's always been, because like the sword of Damocles hanging over my head is like, okay, work starts, like I have a daytime job, so
Yeah.
like work starts, and it's like I tried for a little while to be a morning person, but then what ended up happening is like you just get into your groove, and then you're like, oh shit, I have to be at work like 15 minutes ago, and then like roll in super late and really tired, and like, yeah, it just didn't work out for me.
Oh wow. So what are you doing as a day job right now?
Because like art director, creative director, I work in like advertising basically.
Oh, okay.
That's been kind of my thing. I got out of art school and was like, oh, this is a terrifying amount of debt to take on. So I got into to design and art direction.
Okay, nice. Yeah, so I also want to like kind of switch back to maybe when you were in high school. At this point, did you have it like completely fixed in your mind that you were going to be a painter or an artist?
Yeah, I think an artist of some kind. Like it was, so my parents put me into like a Christian school when I was like middle school.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not like it. And by the time it came around to like my high school, I was like, yeah, this is definitely a thing that I want to go to art school.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I had a teacher, my art teacher there, and she was like, you need to go to the public school, like where you're from, because they have a really good art program. And so that was kind of like where I I took it seriously and told that to my parents, because she was like, look, I mean, like, she was like, look at this art, what we have for an art department here. It's basically a cottage. It was basically like this like little like school that was like, they bought up some farmland in Connecticut and turned it into a school. And like there was like a cow pasture like right next to it, and you had to pass through the cow pasture to get to the soccer field and all that. It wasn't like private school like
Sure.
Rushmore or anything like that.
Nice.
And so we were like, we're in this tiny little cottage, and that was the art department. And then she didn't have very much that she could do. She did some drawing and painting and things like that, but that was not the core of the focus of school there. And so she was like, yeah, if you go to your hometown, like you can do photography class, you can do painting, you can do ceramics, you can do silkscreen, you can do all these different things. And you can really like kind of experiment, and you can build like a little portfolio for when you do want to apply to art school. So she was like, you should just get out of here. And my parents, for whatever reason, they were like, yeah, sure, but that seems, you do that.
Nice. Well, sweet.
Yeah.
So you're in high school and you're already focused on like honing your craft. Is that how you thought about it back then, or were you just like, this is fun, I really like it? Or were you thinking in the future, like, I want to make this a career?
Yeah, I wanted to make it a career. I knew that, because I mean, like, that's like the core of why what brought me to where I did when I went in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do, because at that time I was really into comics and really into like, conceptual art, but like concept art, I should say, not conceptual, concept art, like for movies and things like that.
Yeah.
Like my two closest friends, they're both twins, and they were really into special effects. We all were. We were all into like, if there was behind the scenes stuff, we just like gobbled that up. And, I wanted to actually like work in something like, ILM at like Industrial Light and Magic, and do like, I was like, I would work on Star Wars or something like that. And then, and then I started off with that. And then when I went to art school, it was like completely like, whoa, like my eyes totally opened in terms of what I could be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I see, not to jump around too much, cause I want to get to this later, but, I see in your work that everything sort of has this kind of thread in it, right? It almost seems like every piece could be a different scene from like the same movie or the same TV series. Would you say that like when you went to art school, is that how you were conceptualizing it, or is that how you conceptualize it now?
Conceptualize it now, because like when I went to art school, it was like, the first year was foundation, and it was like, basically it was like boot camp, and it was like, this is how you draw with charcoal, which I had never done. Mm-hmm. This is how, we're going to do all these cool 3D, like we had to do 3D drawing, we had a color theory class, all of that. And that was just the first year. And then second year, you choose your kind of what your major is. And then I went into illustration, which was, that's much more like somebody gives you an assignment, you do it, you do your art based off of that, and waka, you're done. So like whenever I did do like art for myself, I never really kind of took it that seriously or anything until I really started getting deeper into art. I would say like 3 years ago, I took like kind of a pretty long hiatus from painting and any sort of art. And then I'd say lately it's just been focusing a lot on, having, I guess, a better focus, and, what is it I'm trying to do? What are the things that I like? And it's been a lot of, I like world building and things like that. I have, and I'm very interested in that. And that might come from, the way that I like conceptual art, like concept art. I think that kind of has some part to play in it.
Yeah. So when you were in art school, were there any mentors or maybe even students who were older than you that you learned from directly or that you learned a great deal from?
Tons. I had first I had this teacher named Rudy Gutierrez, who is this like phenomenal illustrator, but he is like he totally came at it like a lot of illustrators in that I was learning from. You know, they're very much like it wasn't like they were definitely like craftsmen, but like it was very much more. It's a little more transactional. It's a lot more commercial because that's just the way illustration is. But Rudy had like a very spiritual connection to his art, and all of it like it just has a very specific look to it, and that's just his vision. And I think that when people would choose to hire him for a job or something like that, it was like, oh, they're choosing him because he's Rudy, like because he's doing the thing that he does. It's not like he's this chameleon who has to like change his visual language or anything like that based on the assignment necessarily. And he was also like technically amazing. He is technically amazing. Like, so I learned a lot technique wise, but also just in terms of just like, trying to have vision and like kind of staying, just kind of questioning what that is,
Mm-hmm. What would you, if you had to define, like, I know this is such a silly question that we get asked all the time, but like, if you had to define your work, and it doesn't necessarily have to be genre based, like, what kind of like vision are you seeing with it?
Where, like, what zip code it's in, kind of, or like, what do you mean, like?
Meaning like, in relation to your own work, what's the vision? What's the grand vision there?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it's been, and it's been in more focus for me lately, is that I've just been so like wrapped up in this sort of like post-apocalyptic sort of setting, and it's really just kind of me in a weird way. That's like my weird way of sort of coping with everything right now, and just it's been kind of like just trying to find and make something a little bit beautiful and a little bit odd out of something like a little bit more maybe more morose or something. I don't know, like in terms of how to articulate it. I guess that's kind of where I think I'm at.
Nice. So yeah, real quick, I want to take a look at your work for people who be watching this on video. Here we go. Are you seeing basically your Instagram page right now? Okay, awesome. All right, so here we are on your Instagram page. I didn't actually pull up your website, but I figured this is nowadays everybody sort of uses Instagram sort of like a gallery page, right?
Yeah, I've got to update my website. I've had like so much work that I have to put in there that I just haven't gotten around to yet.
Yeah, same here. But yeah, so yeah, I want to focus on the work here a little bit.
Sure.
So you're saying it's like this sort of like post-apocalyptic kind of vibe to it, which I definitely get, definitely am seeing in there. Would you say there's any sort of other like narrative or any allegories going on in your work?
Yeah, for sure. I think that a lot of it too is also kind of like there's a spiritual like element to it, an aspect to it, because I think that there's I've always been very like fascinated with like mysticism, esotericism, all that. And so I try to put some of that into the work, like I try to give this sort of like this vibe, and like most of the characters I'm trying to they're like like a spiritual moment sometimes, or moment of contemplations, things like that, and like some of the symbols too that I'm trying to use too. Like I'm borrowing from a lot of stuff like that, a lot of old spiritualism and things of that nature. So that's like, I think, a huge theme as well that kind of has been at least throughout all of my, I would say, since I've gotten back into painting.
Yeah.
That's kind of been where I've been.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, you really capture it so well without being like hokey, there's no like pandering going on to, I don't know. I come from kind of a scene where like, I don't know. I don't want to talk too much shit, but like it's just so real. It's very visceral, but it's also spiritual at the same time, which I love about it.
Thank you. Yeah. I try to like, like that's always the thing that I'm trying to like kind of get across in my art, is just this atmosphere, this sort of scent. Like I really want to make it very, very visceral. I want to make it feel a little bit like kind of throws. I want the viewer to sometimes feel like, when things aren't colored the way they're supposed to be, like having things just a little bit more surreal in terms of like what are like my flesh tones and things like that. It's just like one of those things that just makes it feel maybe a little bit more dreamlike.
Yeah, definitely. So like I'm noticing a lot of like I don't know. It seems I like guessing color palettes. So I'm going to take a guess at some of these. Does this one have like, I mean, I get like in most of your work like an ultramarine blue, kind of like somewhere between magenta and alizarin crimson, and maybe like a quinacridone violet.
Yeah, so
some turquoise.
Magenta is one that I definitely, quinacridone magenta, definitely ultramarine blue. It's just like this blue I like, just I've never gotten out of it. I mean, it features very heavily in like, so this painting, for instance, is this is actually a commission that I did based off of a painting from my solo show last year. And my solo show last year, I was definitely much more into, it was like very blue and magenta in terms of the color palette. I kept that very like focused, but I think that magenta definitely is like kind of a big thing that's in a lot of them.
Yeah, it's one of those colors that does kind of hint at it's almost like a color from a different spectrum or something. It's like a space spirit spectrum or something like that. I don't know how to describe it. If you know, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's like, isn't that like one of those things where it's like magenta or something like that isn't actually like a real color? It's basically your brain is making a weird connection between like purple and I forget how it works. But there's something about like the way that your brain kind of is sort of invents these colors within a certain range of like lavender and magenta and whatnot.
Oh my gosh, I'm thrilled by that knowledge. No wonder I love it so much. Yeah, I'm a big magenta fan too over here.
Team magenta.
Yeah. But yeah, I want to talk about the process too with your work, man, because okay, so we've gotten kind of a nice background of where you came from. Obviously, you're traditionally trained, which I could pretty much tell by just looking at your work. But I'm wondering, where do you get your compositions, your ideas from, or more importantly, what's the process from beginning to end that you take with your work?
Well, there's a lot of agonizing in my sketchbook over it. In my sketchbook, I feel like I look at other artists and their sketchbooks are very like, here is a very nice, neat drawing that, that somebody has done. And it looks nice. And you could like cut that page out of there and you could sell it, right? For me, it's total chicken scratch. And I'm just trying to like constantly like I will just draw a thing that I'm like, oh, this could be a really interesting little arrangement of items that could make a really cool headdress or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always got that kind of simmering in the background. But I always just try to I always start with the sketching, and then like what symbols am I trying to pull into it? What and there's always kind of a little bit of I try to pull in something that's a little bit more like sometimes I will pull in pieces of inspiration from an artifact. So I'm really into history, um, and so I love seeing like old artifacts from like 800 BC,
Yeah.
800 BC Iberian culture or something like that, or
Nice.
sometimes like before the Romans in Britain or something. Like I'm kind of really into that. So I always have, I'm always kind of collecting that stuff in the background as well. And so when it kind of comes time for like doing a painting, I kind of have like like an idea, rough idea in my head, and then it's just a matter of like just doing a lot of sketching and like really working out what am I doing, can I be doing something different with the figure in this, what can I be doing different with the propping, is there something interesting I can do that's different with the composition, things like that. And so then I'll have like kind of a rough idea of like, all right, here's all the things I'm trying to arrange, because it's almost like it's sort of collagey too to some degree.
Yeah.
Um, so then I'll kind of like pull together my reference, and then I'll Photoshop it together, and then play around with what are the colors I want to do on that, and then fuss around with that, and then then I'm off to the races. Do my drawing transfer on the board, and then I just start painting.
Nice. So is it always on board? Is it always on wood panel?
Yeah, it's usually always on wood, unless it's like I did a thing for like a tarot show back in like December, and that was one that I did on illustration board, which was like kind of nice. I hadn't touched illustration board in years, but I wanted the final thing, the final painting, because it was for a tarot card set,
Yeah.
I did want the actual physical piece to kind of have that feeling too.
Yeah.
So that's why I kind of did that. But yeah, it's usually it's always on wood.
Okay. Yeah. Do you just prefer the smoothness, or?
Oh yeah, 1,000%.
Yeah.
I've never liked canvas. I never liked it.
Okay. Nice. And it's all oil. I mean, it's got to be oil, right? It looks like it is. Or is it?
Oh no, I paint acrylic.
Oh, wow. Nice. Okay. Sweet. I was just sitting here like the past 3 days just assuming it was oil, didn't even check like the dang hashtags that are like right there in front of me. But yeah, wow, you get really really smooth blends. But let's talk about that a little bit. I paint acrylic as well. And for me, do you sort of keep like two brushes in your hand, and one's like a damp brush and the other's like in your offhand, and then of course you have the loaded brush with the paint, and then so offhand you have damp brush and maybe even a dry brush. Is that how you kind of get that?
It depends on like what I'm doing. So some of it I just do dry brushing. I do a lot of scumbling. And then, if I'm doing flesh tones where I'm really trying to get a very nice broad but very gentle gradient, that's when I'll just do a wet on wet. So I'll have 3 brushes in my hand actually, where I'll have, one for one color, one for the other. And then I very quickly have my blender, and then I just kind of blend it.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're blending it on the surface, and that's cool.
Yeah.
I've done kind of both ways. Like more recently, I've been more into like just mixing out flat colors and using like just like sort of tones to hint at three dimensionality, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, man, this makes me like even more impressed with your work. Would you say that like learning illustration sort of is more in line, if you were to transfer to painting? I'd say it's more in line with acrylic painting.
Yeah, yeah, because it was always like, I tried for my first year to do, and that's my first year of like, or sorry, I should say my second year when I was just starting like my classes, my illustration classes.
Mm-hmm.
I tried doing a lot of oil, and I loved oil, but it was messy. I got it everywhere. I hated the fumes, and I'm also very impatient. At the time, luckily, I was like really into more like, everybody kind of gets goes through the stage, maybe phase like with it, but I was into like impressionist painting. And so, I could be as rough as I wanted to. But then I think just because, like what I was trying to achieve, I just started getting into acrylics, and I just kind of never went back.
Well, and it also looks like you're kind of, following the same oil recipe with going like thin and dark first, right?
Mm-hmm.
With your layers and then building up probably to more and more thick layers. How thick do you go? It seems like everything's so smooth. Yeah.
Pretty thin.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty thin, right? Okay. Nice.
Yeah, I don't really get a lot of. It's something maybe I should play around with more, to be less fussy about that surface quality. But I really do love having it be as smooth as it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's and that's been something I've only been getting lately too with my surface. Like with the woods, I bought like a power sander for it.
Hell yeah!
And so I look really nice and smooth. And then I use. Obviously you have to size it, and then you have to put on the gesso, but I use spray gesso now.
Really?
And yeah, because when you're painting on wood panel, you have to put like that layer of like GAC 100 to like seal it.
Right.
And between when you have layers of that and you get brush strokes from that and you can't sand it, and then you put on the gesso and you get the brush strokes from the gesso, you can sand it well enough. And then what I do on the very top is I put a layer of absorbent ground, and it really gives it this paper texture. It like really absorbs
nice
watery paint. And so that allows me to do really nice, like kind of washy blends on my underpaintings, in a way I don't think you can really do with gesso. But yeah, with the acrylic, with the spray gesso, I can get a really super flat, surface. And then when I put absorbent ground on, I don't have very many built-in brush strokes from priming the canvas.
Nice. And that's this process video here, it almost looks like right here coming up, it looks like you're working with watercolor almost, right? But as you're saying, it's like, it looks like it's very absorbent in there, and that's on wood, which is blowing my mind. The wood I usually in the past have worked on has been like just like birch wood from Home Depot, right? And then like the fancy like clay board, which isn't absorbent at all. So yeah, this is cool. So, and it's the ground that you were talking about.
Yeah, it's golden absorbent ground. It's called.
Nice.
And it just gives you a really great, like you can really create watercolor effects with it if you want to, and you don't need a lot of like layers to get that. And I just love it because I just love the drag. When I'm painting, it's just like feeling the drag on the brush just right is just that's just kind of my preference. I mean, everybody's kind of different.
Yeah.
But then I find too, it holds on, like the paint really holds onto the absorbent ground a lot better than if I was to put it on gesso, especially when I'm doing layers of dry brush on top, because you put acrylic down on top of already dried acrylic, and it'll like reactivate it a little bit.
Yeah. Right.
And if you scumble too hard, or if you dry brush too hard, you'll start to pick up the layers underneath it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, dang, you learn something new every day, right? I didn't even know that absorbent ground existed. And
yeah, it's totally. I highly recommend it. It's been like my favorite discovery in the last like 4 years.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna check it out. I kind of want to get back to like history and artifacts that you were mentioning earlier in your work. I'm a big fan of history too, but I honestly don't seek it out enough. Where are you listening to like podcasts? Are you like watching documentaries about historical things?
Yeah, I was really into this podcast called Hardcore History,
Right.
which I highly recommend to everybody. It's this guy, Dan Carlin. And if you're going to listen to anything, he has this like 6-part series. Each one is very long, The Wrath of the Khans. And it's just all about the Mongolian Empire, which like none of us learn about in Western history.
Right.
And like how amazing they are and like what they accomplished. But I read too, like I'm really into like, Roman history, Greek history. I've been getting into a lot more lately. And then I'm also trying to get into a bit more of like pre-Columbian history as well down in South America. Like my mom's from Ecuador. So I've always been kind of like fascinated by that, but I never really engaged with it as much. And now I'm just like I was always fascinated with it, but I just never really got like dug into it and like tried to learn more.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a bunch of audio books sort of lined up over, well, I'll show you. But yeah, it's like that Mythos, 1491, New Revelations of America Before Columbus. So yeah, I'm looking to get into that stuff too. Do you feel like that like
Guns and Steel? That's a good one. I just saw it on there.
Yeah.
And Sapiens, that's another great one.
Nice. Who wrote Sapiens again? I know it's like kind of a famous writer at this point.
God, that's a great question. I never remember the name of the author.
Is it Malcolm Gladwell? Is that who it was? Probably not. I don't know.
No, because it was translated from. I think it was originally this Israeli dude. Yeah, Yuval Noah Harari or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice. I say nice way too much as a placeholder. But yeah, so I'm also seeing like modern artifacts and even maybe like this one. It looks like she has, are those gun clips in her helmet there?
So I've been like getting really into this because I'm like thinking in the future it's like with this, and I'm like I always think about like as I'm looking around, like I have like a million like Star Wars action figures, right? And I think to myself, 300 years in the future, 400 years in the future, aliens are going to come down here and they're going to like, we're going to be gone. And then they're going to like sit through all this stuff. And they're going to be like, there was this religion and there was this guy with a white shirt and, blonde hair and a laser sword of some sort. He must have been very important to their religion,
Yes.
So I always think about like in all of these, like just, what are these like cool things that are from our modern day that would be purposed down the road, in like a lot of headdresses and things like that. Like, would they be some sort of relic, know? Do they have like, would they attribute some sort of like spiritual significance to them? And that's where like a lot of that stuff kind of comes in. And it's always like, some of it is like a little bit more like, there'll be like something that's, like bullets and things like that. Something like, things of war, because, we are a very violent little species.
Yeah.
So I could see that being a thing. And then also like, obviously like pieces of like consumerism, like, like in this one, there's like a Rolex on her forehead. And
yeah. Oh man, yeah, it's perfect. Let's see. Yeah, totally. This is me buying time trying to remember what I was thinking of. Just gonna make a little note here.
But I love the other thing I love to do with it too is I just love to age things, and there's something really cool about rusting and giving these things that are like modern, just giving them this like really crazy like just wearing the shit out of them, and like what's an old iPhone gonna look like?
Right, right. So, where do you see humans in the future? Are you an optimist? You said like 300-400 years you don't really see us around. I kind of agree. But how do you
Yeah,
think what do you think's going to happen? Is it going to just be like catastrophe, or are we going to have some sort of like tech apotheosis or something?
I think it's gonna be like I think it's probably going to be something, to be honest with you, that's definitely climate related. And then everything is all connected, right? So I could easily see, climate causing a lot of international strife and
Yeah.
causing a lot of like, tensions and wars and things like that. And I can just see things escalating from there in a pretty awful way, because I think it'll be a case where I wouldn't be surprised, like if it's just one, it's going to be uninhabitable. Like most of everything's going to be uninhabitable. There's going to be the natural disasters that come because of climate change. And then you're going to have on top of that, it's human nature to like be in like, like getting into these conflicts. And I could
Right.
easily see it being, if you've survived the climate change stuff, well, then you're probably also going to have some weird, like, going to have to survive the wars too or something. I don't know. Like if I was going to guess, that's probably how it would go.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what to think. I like to sort of, I guess, withhold speculation on it probably because just to protect myself emotionally, you know? Like having to think about all that stuff is just like exhausting in a lot of ways. But I mean, I think that when it comes down to it, like I don't see it's hard to like envision humans on this same trajectory like 200 or 300 years in the future, because we're going so asymptotic with technology and with just how completely interconnected everything really is now on a social level. Like it's always been interconnected on let's say like environmental level, but now it's like all these economies are relying on each other, and it's just to me it seems like a big old mess. But
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
hopeful, but I don't know.
yeah, like I could see it, like, because it's like I don't know. I think it's also like everything, civilization, technology, all of that stuff is all very uh it's fragile. Like
Yeah.
it's always interesting how like when they conceptualize after like Rome fell, how there was a lot of knowledge that just kind of lost or receded into different places and didn't like reemerge again for another like 700, 800 years,
Right.
and
R-
that's, I don't know, see
yeah.
that happen.
What do you think about the idea that do you know Graham Hancock? Do you know
I
his?
don't.
So apparently about 12,000 to 13,000 years ago, a comet or some sort of like space object struck the earth, and Graham Hancock is he's a journalist, I guess is how he describes himself, but he goes like looking at all these different pieces of evidence from the past about how like the pyramids apparently have water erosion on them. So does the Sphinx, which would mean that they would have had to have been built in a time when Egypt was a more or less of a desert, which dates
Yeah.
way back, right? And so like he thinks that there was an ancient civilization that was maybe not as like mechanically technologic as we are, but they were advanced in terms of like they knew agriculture, they knew astronomy. What do you think about that? What's your take on that, if you had to guess?
um It's like I mean, I think that's true because I mean, I'm like looking it up right now that there was this device that was like found very recently and it's Greek. It was in it was in a shipwreck and it's like, it's made like with a bunch of gears and wheels and things. And it's like basically like a little different size gears and things like that. I forget what it was called. It's the something, it was like began with a T. And oh yeah, here it is. It's the Antikythera mechanism. If you look it up, it's like really wild that it's basically kind of like a little computer,
Yeah.
and it's old. I mean, it's like a couple thousand years BC.
Wow.
But like, yeah, I think that there was possibly a bit of. I mean, we are surprisingly as a civilization like older than I think. And we're older than we think, and we're learning that more when we keep finding like certain sites and things like that bear the markings of like modern human, like as we know it,
Yeah.
activity. And it can be like it like predates like what we're thinking like by like 100,000 years or something like that.
Yeah.
And you're just, oh, that's wild. But then there's like stuff like I was reading this really cool book that was 1139. I think it's 1177. I think it is.
Mhm.
It was basically this year in like 1177 BC where they don't know why some cataclysmic event happened, and almost every civilization in like the Fertile Crescent, Near East, all of that, even Egypt, all like there was some huge catastrophic event that like all of those civilizations like were under increased duress, and like there was all sorts of strife. Cities just like kind of disappeared and vanished and things like that. And
Wow.
they the first is attributed to something they call the Sea People, which is like they were thinking like some sort of like weird Vikings or something like that may have shown up, because it shows up in like Ramses II, like, and on this day, this battle happened, and,
Yeah.
Ramses lost 10,000 men to the Sea Peoples or something like that.
Yeah.
So, like, that's really wild.
It's like dolphins all of a sudden became sentient and decided to kick some ass.
I would be surprised if they know more than we think they do.
Same. Yeah, but just to kind of bring it full circle, like in your work, I'm seeing, there's definitely humans in it, and it seems like they've survived some sort of cataclysm, right? And and maybe they're, if you think about it in terms of Rome losing all that knowledge, or Rome falling, and then the West basically losing about 700 years of knowledge, and then sort of rediscovering it. That seems like the vibe that I'm picking up on in your work too.
Yeah, it's definitely like imagining, kind of picking up from the pieces of like picking up from like the rubble of like kind of collapse, and then doing what humans do as we adapt,
and then tell all these stories about what happened before us, even though we have no clue really. I mean, we can use a little bit more science and have a better guess, but
yeah. But yeah, that's kind of like roughly like, I guess that's sort of it, in terms of like the way I kind of interpret it, like how that manifests itself, I guess, in my paintings. Because it's a lot of that, and it's like, yeah, that's also another thing too, is I always just think about how things like we end up always repurposing stuff like that. Like one of the things I was struck by when I was like the Colosseum, like people like, it was easier to just in like medieval times to just pick at the columns, and in those columns there's gigantic metal posts that hold these gigantic slabs in place.
Yeah.
And there's the metal cleats. And what people did in medieval times is it was just easier to just chip into one of those columns and then mine out the metal from that. And so when you go to the Colosseum, there's all these little places where there's these just deep holes chipped into them. And it was just because it's easier to do that. And like, I just think that people always end up reusing things or repurposing them in some way. And I would think too, if it's just something that's like technological that you don't understand, like
Right.
you probably surmise that it's something super important to people once upon a time.
Yeah, but it's kind of like the necessity of the moment will always trump the the former sacredness or former pillar of knowledge
Mhm.
that something used to be. It's really, really interesting. But yeah, so I want to pivot once again and talk about like business. And the
Mhm.
question I have is, how do you navigate in the art world? What's your strategy?
Well, right now I've been mostly just kind of, well, I'm figuring out whatever my next steps are because I've been doing gallery work for a while now,
Mm-hmm.
and I've just been kind of, that's been a really great way for me to like either in group shows to kind of hone and keep getting, keep trying to expand and hopefully have more people see my work. But um, in terms of where I want to go business wise, I'm not sure. It's like I kind of would love to do stuff that's like more like find different audiences and different ways um to create that's not just paintings, I guess, not just gallery shows and things like that. I
Yeah.
think it's tough, like galleries take a cut, right? And for right now I'm fine with that. I'm like, like there's a lot involved. I did my own pop-up show one time, with this guy Ian Cinco. Highly recommend everybody take a look at his stuff. But he's a
Ian
wild,
Cinco, like
yeah,
the number.
yeah, CINCO.
Nice.
And I did a show with him. I was like, hey, let's do this. Let's do like a pop-up shop. Let's do a pop-up show and do like a little solo show. And we put all, like we got a space on, I think it's called Storefront,
Mm-hmm.
is the site. And it's kind of like an Airbnb for like basically like spaces. Like if you want to do a pop-up shop or if you want to do a pop-up gallery show or whatever. And so I did that. And then it was like, for one night's work, like, I mean, there was a lot of work in like promoting it and like getting everything together and like, organizing it, getting out the word, buying some ads for it on Instagram.
Sure.
We had a really good turnout. And it was a lot of legwork for one day's work, for one night. And I was like, I don't know that I have it in me to do this.
Right.
And then like I would love to be able to just like to keep painting, and like I totally envy like when certain artists they just crank out work and then they just sell directly. Like they're just like, hey, I have this thing available on my site, go for it on Instagram, and then somebody gobbles it up. I have not had any success with that, but I'm also not very like proactive about that right now because I'm just like uh everything I have, like I make something and then I immediately I have to ship it off to like, a gallery now, like I have this huge box over here that I just had to clean up before this call. Had crap all over the place to get this thing all set up to send out to San Francisco. Um, but like, yeah, I would love to be able to sell more, have direct relationships with buyers too.
Mm-hmm.
And then like, yeah, being able to do like, I don't know, even like I say graphic novel, but like I have a friend who does graphic novels and it's like it's slave work. It's
So
like
much
tough.
work. Yeah.
It's so much work. It's so
Yeah.
much work. And I like every one of those guys, I respect them so much because it is a grind. It is a grind.
Yeah.
But it's cool storytelling. It's a cool vessel for storytelling.
Yeah. So, a question about the galleries. Did you reach out to them or were they reaching out to you? What was that process like?
When I first started, I reached out to a bunch of galleries. And I just like went to every one of them. I checked out what was their submission policy, and what I did too was then I would call them up and I would just be like, "Oh, hey, I'm going to do this submission. Like wanted to submit some work. I have to send it. Just want to make sure this is the right email. Who should I address? So that way at least I could send this email and it's a submission, and I could be like, hey, Jeff, glad
Yeah.
somebody at the gallery. I just talked to them and they said I should send you my stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I sent out a bunch of like cold emails and got a couple bites, not a ton. And then there were like, honestly, it was like there were a couple galleries that I've loved that were doing open calls, and one of them was La Luz de Jesus in LA. Then before that, there was Jonathan Levine Projects, which I was like, when I was in school, like that was like a really, like that gallery just came out, like just opened when I was in school. But I remember being like, whoa, he is showing some really cool artists. It's not just like the usual sort of like stuff that you might see in like Chelsea galleries. And then he had like an open call, so I definitely jumped on that. And then Arch Enemy Arts, and I would say that like, from that, those were really good shows, and I kind of got some good relations because of that. But I think the biggest was obviously with Arch Enemy in Philadelphia, because they've been like super supportive, and they've I've had a lot of shows with them now. Like they started inviting me to group shows, and then having more group shows like that. And then Instagram is obviously the best way that I have to, and like everybody, to kind of show what you're working on and whatnot. And then I think more places kind of found me through that. And then I like really haven't submitted to very many places after that. Like it's been a lot of, I've been very lucky that I've had a lot of galleries who've come to me asking me to, participate in group shows and things like that. So that's basically been it, like in a nutshell.
Now,
it's just
you had a solo show at Arch Enemy?
Yeah, I just finished my second solo show with them.
Nice.
My first one was literally at the beginning of 2020. It was like just as everything was hitting the fan with all this COVID stuff. And I was like, damn, what a bummer. It's my first solo show, and I really would love to just be at a gallery and like to actually I want that experience. But like, that's just, it was bad then, and like we had just started,
Right. No one knew what was going on. So
exactly.
what'd you do during the pandemic? This is a question that I've sort of stopped asking people, but I think it's always good to touch back in on it. Like what was your strategy during the pandemic? Were you still going to your day job at all, or was that a thing? Or
well, I was a freelancer up until the pandemic, believe it or not.
Cool.
That was the best. I loved freelancing, doing what I do, because I would go into a gig for a couple months, and then I knew how much I needed to make. Like I'd be like, okay, I need to be working this many days or this many, whatever, this many weeks out of the year. And then what was really great about it was that it was so inconsistent. Like you would have a nice big gap of a month and a half, and I could just paint day and night. And it was great. I really can only paint at night because of work. Then I also have I have a daughter. I have a 3-year-old. So,
oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so that took a bit of time. That takes some time, and so like all I have are like late nights. And once COVID hit, I was freelancing for one of my old bosses, and he was like, yeah, like everybody's working from home, so I just kind of, it was great because I would like be able to work, maybe in between meetings here and there, I'd be able to do like a drawing or something like that, or I'd be able to prep a canvas or something like that. And then that's just kind of how I made it work. And then I became full time like a year, like in August of 2020. And then then it just became like having to paint at night and whatnot, but working from home, which I don't really mind at all. I love it. To be honest with you.
Yeah.
It's the best.
That's kind of nice because you have the best of both worlds. Like you're getting a steady paycheck, but you're also not. I think the worst part about like having a job for me is like the commute, the time, the gas. Like, I mean, and I complain about it, and I don't even live in Denver. I live like near Boulder, and like sometimes the commute is, I'm like, oh, 30 minutes, and like some people have to really deal with traffic and, commute way further than I used to.
Yeah. One of my, I actually interviewed for a job once upon a time out in Boulder. And I remember it was like the commute wouldn't have been too bad, but the problem was that like any of the affordable housing was not in Boulder. So it was like the commute seemed a little hairy.
Yeah, we live outside Boulder, by the way, just to give you an idea of how I'm making it work.
Yeah. What do you? By the way, what do you do?
Well, I'm a painter as well, and do this podcast, which doesn't really, at the moment, generate all that much money. I've got a little Patreon going. It's like about $150 a month, enough to pay a bill or two. So yeah, I'm just kind of stringing together print sales and an original here and there. I'm thinking about getting a little part-time gig with some guys I used to work for in the weed industry, just like a couple days a week.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's kind of nice. Like
they just legalized that here, and I was like, oh man, I gotta find some way to get in on that in some way, shape, or form. Like prints, I think that's always been dicey for me because I just do like and again, it's like I don't promote it very well. I'm very terrible about like passive income streams.
Yeah.
Even though it's like a great idea to do prints, I've just been a little hesitant because just kind of the upfront investment for doing like a limited edition run.
Yeah. That's pretty much what I do, and I sort of know, I can sort of gauge how many I'm going to sell, based off people's reaction, how many I sold last time, and so like right now my editions are like 20, 25, something like that.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I don't ever, like, I think I'm done doing just little poster open edition prints anymore. Like I'll do limited edition canvas prints. Like I'll only print, maybe 10 or 15 total, something like that. Mm-hmm. And another little trick that I have up my sleeve, like I came up in the kind of like festival community. And so I'd be like live painting at concerts and stuff like that, which is very helpful. Especially now that like my work has improved over the last 3 or 4 years. So that helps. But like during the pandemic, it was a little rough, but.
Did that affect you most because like, some of the, like obviously the concerts and stuff like that are all like kind of on ice and like that. I imagine that was probably a big.
Yeah. I'll be really honest. I filed for unemployment for like 4 or 5 months during 2020. And then for some reason I was like, I think I got this, I think this will be okay. And then I stopped, and now I'm like, and I am okay, but it's kind of like, I wish still I would have had like the extra $200-$300 every week or so. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But yeah, the pandemic, I know it was a kind of tough on a lot of people, but it seems like it's nice to be able to work from home. Are you mostly just in meetings and reviewing, like you say you're an art director for advertising?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a lot of like, because I'm like kind of, I oversee a lot of people now, but it
Hmm.
was a lot more like when I was a freelancer, it was much more like hands-on doing designs and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, but now, yeah, it's I handle, I think, a lot more. It's a lot more meetings. I
Hmm.
still obviously like. I think it's very important because like that's the whole reason I kind of got into it was it was supposed to be something that I could like kind of use that my design brain essentially,
Right.
visual conceptual brain, um, and I still do projects here and there for where I'm actually doing it now, because it's just important to kind of you know keep that craft kind of sharp.
Sure.
Uh, but yeah, like that's mostly like that's what it is. I'm in a lot of meetings, and then if I can steal away in between meetings, I'll go upstairs, and my in-laws live upstairs, so they like take care
Oh,
of my
cool.
daughter, and I go
Uh,
see her and have lunch with her, and
oh, that's
uh,
awesome.
yeah, or she comes in and invades the space and like hides my stuff. Like I was like, where did my sketchbook go? Like I was trying to find it before the calling, and I was like, I can't find it anywhere. And then I finally find it tucked away somewhere. And all of my sketches for my next show, like I was just trying to like
Yeah.
noodle out ideas and concepts. She scribbled on every one of them.
She was. She's like, oh, I'm gonna make this a collab. You
Yeah,
know.
exactly.
Well, yeah. I
But
mean, that sounds like a pretty sweet setup. Um, it's cool that you're able to kind of use something that's at least like painting adjacent, or like what you're doing in the gallery world. It's like you still have like your design eye like trained on things, right?
yeah,
And so yeah, it seems like that would keep things sharp, also in your own process.
yeah,
Um,
I think that a lot of that definitely, like my design eye, definitely plays a lot, and vice versa. And my eye for composition like that obviously also plays into my design life
mhm.
and all.
Yeah. Actually, speaking of process, I forgot to ask you one question that I was really curious about. Like, so these figures and these portraits in
Mhm.
in your work, are you using photo references? Are you taking photos yourself, or is this straight from the imagination?
No, those are there's photo reference, and I like take I'll take a figure and I might hodgepodge together, different arms and things like that on there, and then yeah, it all kind of comes together when I do the drawing and then the actual painting, um, to kind of hopefully make it look a little bit more natural. But I just bought a bunch of equipment, um, earlier in the year, so I'm gonna be start shooting my own reference and seeing
Nice.
how that goes.
Hell yeah.
Probably in like I think about 3 weeks or so is when I have books. So have to see where that goes because it's always like that's the hard thing too. Is like I'm not a great photographer and setting up the lights and things like that, and
Right.
there's a lot of technical aspects to that that's always been kind of a challenge. But hopefully it won't be,
Yeah.
for the,
New area to grow into and learn about, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Because I originally bought the whole setup to take photos of my paintings because I was like I had this guy that I would, he was like, yeah, I've got I've got a it was through a friend of a friend. He's got like a camera, and he would basically come in with his lights, his camera, tripod, all that. He'd take a bunch of photos, and then he'd process them and give them to me and whatever. But I was like, it's really hard to be like kind of beholden to that. So I was like, I looked at his rig and I was like, I should just get this stuff. I
Yeah,
should just get this stuff. And so I did. And then I was like, yeah, no, I think I definitely need to use this for my own like reference now. Like I think I can do this.
totally.
So, like here's hoping.
Yeah. It'll once you get it down, it'll make things a little more simple, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, especially when it comes to like uh yeah, stitching together different pieces. Because the thing also too, I still will do a lot of stitching because it's like sometimes there's a certain face that I'm looking for that I want to put on there.
Hmm.
Like, the hands are not as expressive as I want them to be. So I'll have to find something, or sometimes I take photos of my own hands and then I put them in there, and then that becomes the reference.
Yeah. I've done that before.
Yeah.
Like, I can't find a picture of Erykah Badu's hands anywhere. So I'm just like, I'll just do something. So where do you see kind of your work or your career headed in the future in terms of your own art, and maybe even landing like a gig that would be like kind of a dream gig?
Damn, that's a good question. Well, my real hope is I want to do something where, um, like, I really want to obviously paint, keep doing gallery work and all of that. I definitely want to expand out of it, but I also like kind of been playing around with the thought of like starting like a little small gallery or something like that that also doubles as a studio space for myself. And seeing kind of where that goes. Like Anthony Hurd does something like that.
Right.
And he has like exhibitions and stuff like that in his gallery space out in, I think he's in Santa Fe, or is he Albuquerque?
I know he's in New Mexico. I'm not sure which one actually.
I can't remember which, but but you know, the good thing there is that there's, you know, like if if it's Santa Fe, either or, there's still a good art scene there.
Yeah.
I'm up in like a little bit just north of New York City. I'm close enough to a couple places, little towns that have galleries, but you know, it's not there's not like going to be a huge art scene here. So it would be like, how else can I make that space also make money on top of me painting out of it too?
Right. Yeah. Well, I've always found that like artists, in my humble opinion, are the best curators, right, of work, because they know what's good and what went into it. Like it's kind of like how when musicians listen to music, they're like, oh, I know what they're doing here. And then, you know, and it's like we see paintings and we might not always get it right, but I thought you were using oils just because, you know, I didn't really look into it, but it just sort of looked like smooth. And now I know your secrets. But yeah, I think that artists have a good eye for those kinds of things, right?
Yeah. I mean, like that's the only thing I can imagine that's tough about curating and running a gallery, just from my experience, even when it was just me and one other person, is that it's got to be like herding cats.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I always hear from like gallerists where they're just like, thank you so much for being on time with this stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you for like everything being ready to hang, and like thank you for like packing it well, you know, like all that. And I'm like, now, like you're supposed to do that, right?
Yeah.
And I talked to some, and like it's always very interesting because I'm like, you know, you get the impression it's like, oh, stuff comes in late, and that'll happen because stuff gets shipped late, you know.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to like, you know, to imagine that, you know, it's just easy to forget, you know, like, oh, this thing's got to be in house by what date? Oh crap, you know, like
right.
So I can see where that can be like kind of tough to wrangle and keep all of that straight and make sure all the artists are getting the information that they need and things like that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's kind of like when galleries ask for the work, they probably do it like, you know, a little bit before they need it. Kind of like how you tell your buddy who's always late to something, oh no, we're leaving at noon, so he's there by 1 or whatever.
Yeah. I'm that buddy though.
Yeah. yeah, we're artists. I mean, yeah. And that's
I come precisely when I mean to. I'm never late.
Yeah. Gandalf style, baby.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of like the same thing with the podcast. Like I've had people be like, yeah, I want to do it. And then the day of, they'll cancel, or like they'll be like, that sounds great. And then they'll ghost for a couple of weeks, and then I'll hit them back up and they'll be like, yeah. And then I'll be like, okay, so let's hammer down a date, and then ghost for a couple more weeks. And so, but I get it too, because I live that life. I'm about that life. So that's just kind of,
like that.
uh,
It's just gonna happen. Yeah.
yeah. I think artists' brains are just, we're always in the realm of the conceptual and thinking of ideas, and just a mile, 1,000 miles a minute up here in the old noggin.
Yeah, because it becomes so like it's very obsessive, right? Like it's very like I always talk about it with my wife, and I'm always just like, yeah, it's just this weird, like it's like compulsive, and it like becomes one of those things where it's like she's just like, please don't paint before we have to go somewhere, because I know for a fact you're gonna paint until the last possible second, and then we're gonna be so late getting out that door. And I'm
Yeah.
like, no, well, totally, it's gonna be fine.
Yeah.
And then like, yeah, cut to later, it's like shows up late to a thing, and that's just kind of my MO. But that's like, like you just get into it and then you forget, and you
It's the
just
beauty
space
of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I spend so much time in the shower, just like I can have like a 30-minute shower and I have very little to do. Like I don't like condition my hair or like do anything. Like I could be done like in 5 minutes,
Yeah.
and I could be in there for 30 minutes, and I'm just like, I can be like rubbing my eyes and just thinking like, what's the next thing I'm gonna do? Okay, so I definitely want to do this or that. How much time do I have left on this painting? And like I easily could do that. Like time just kind of flies like that for me sometimes.
Nice. Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse, I would say.
Yeah. But it's
Um,
like, it's great to have this as like there's nothing better than to be like obsessed with art to me. Like it's just so like I think about like, being obsessed and going down like rabbit holes with like social media, Reddit, or Instagram, whatever, and it's just like this weird time suck, and then you come out the other end and you've got nothing to show for it except maybe some existential dread and being really depressed about the news.
yeah.
But like at least with art, it's like you're on the other end of it and you have like a thing and you're like, oh, I'm gonna have a thing.
Yeah,
I made that painting.
Yeah. You're producing something, you're not just doom scrolling all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how on the last, 7, 8 podcasts, every time social media kind of wriggles its way into the conversation, much like it has with all of our lives, I guess. How's your relationship with that? I know you said you don't really put too much effort into it. Do you find that like it's hard for you to not scroll sometimes? Because I know I just follow a bunch of artists, and so it's Instagram. It makes it really easy for me to just be like, "Wow, cool! Wow, I really like that." And then I'm like, "Man, I just spent like 30 minutes looking at other people's work when I had this painting that's like, finish me,"
Yeah. I definitely have that. But I also think that it's really interesting because like I love Instagram for this the one simple fact that it's like a really great way you just get to see what everybody else is doing. It's like you're like you get to do this studio visit through like all over the world in like half an hour.
Right.
And it's so like that's so cool. And like
Definitely.
you think about like 15 years ago, like you had like you would have your like portfolio online,
right,
and you would go to gallery shows, and if you're like close enough to galleries that were even showed stuff you liked, right? Now it's like, damn, like you can really like just see everything, and I kind of love that. And then you get to discover new people, and that's also kind of cool. The thing that kind of sucks is obviously it's like, it's constantly like listening to you, and it's like, oh, I heard you were looking for furniture. Here's some ads from West Elm, and like that's not what I'm looking for. But I think of it as lost time, but it's only like lost time to me if I like go down like the rabbit hole of like, okay, let me just go through like the explore, and then it's just a bunch of random stuff.
Yeah.
And that's when I feel like I've lost time. And that happens when I go on Reddit. Like I'll go on Reddit. I'll be like,
That's the one.
yeah, that because it's such a wide range of stuff, and I haven't really curated the subs that I follow well enough. Because I follow a bunch of art subs. I follow a bunch of like artifact porn is a really good one that,
Nice.
In terms of cool places to find like interesting artifacts. And like, yeah, like there's just so many of those little subs, but I could definitely lose time there. It's not as focused and not as like art focused for me. So then it definitely becomes kind of like lost time. But I try to keep a lot of it. Like I quit Facebook years ago.
Good for you. Dang. Yeah.
It's not good. It's not a fun place.
No, not really.
The most I'm on there is there's a group called the Dark Art Society.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in that, and that's like one group. I show up there maybe once a week, and then that's it.
Yeah. It's just disrupted everything about how humans relate to each other. But it's also, I describe it as just the classic double-edged sword analogy where like it's the greatest and the worst thing to happen to civilization in a long time. Because yes, it connects you, but then it's like, yes, it connects you. Like you're hearing and seeing everyone's, emotions, thoughts, psychology, just out there for everyone to see. And you would think like, at least my personality thinks like, oh, that's interesting. Like I'm interested in people. People are very interesting to me. But then sometimes it's like if you want to find the artifacts from people's psychology, right? You sort of have to wear this kind of hazmat suit of your own, like whatever you want to call it, like mental boundaries. Like sometimes, like if I catch myself scrolling through Facebook, I just try and put it down. But sometimes if I'm like, oh, that was a pretty funny post, and then I go, and then I read something, and I'm like, okay, that's the one. That's where I cut it off. That's where I put it down. It's like not everything that's interesting should be consumed by your mind, because then you have all these other people's minds like banging around in your mind. I don't know.
Yeah, like the thing I will say that I do always find super fascinating is you'll find an article and then like, it's or somebody posts something really weird and it's like, oh, what's this food fight look like in the comments section?
Yeah.
And then it's like lift up the rock and then there's all the little like creatures that are under there and you're like, oh, too much.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's, I mean, I don't know. We could go on and with analogies and stuff, but yeah, it's just interesting to see how different people interface with it, because there are also like opportunities sometimes hidden there. Like, I saw the gallery that you work with, Archenemy, the other day, maybe a couple of weeks ago, that they were announcing their open call, right? And that's something that like I wouldn't have been aware of had I not, And so, I just want to shout out like the good parts of it too, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's like, I mean, like I love Instagram still. Like, I mean, I think it's tough because of the algorithm, and that really annoys me because the way that they keep trying to sweeten that in a weird way, and like, it just makes it hard for artists because it's like, oh well, you're not doing a short form video or enough reels, so you're not going to show up in as many people's feeds anymore, and that kind of stinks. But I think that like the positive of it, like I said, is just like, yeah, like we get to see all of this different stuff, and even galleries. Like that's how I found out about like their Arch Enemy's open call was through Instagram. That's how I found about all of these open calls was usually through Instagram.
Yeah.
And like honestly, not for nothing, it's like I don't know where like if anybody would be interested in my work if it just hung around in a gallery completely in a vacuum without people knowing about me or knowing about it on Instagram. So
right, 100%. Like that's how I feel about my own work too. it's pretty amazing that I've garnered this much attention from this amount of people. It's like
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, okay, cool. And it helps me to like affirm, like we all need some sort of external affirmation, some more than others. But it's helped me kind of like affirm, like, okay, like people like this. I love making it, so it helps me just kind of like keep going. And I imagine that that's like, and I think I would have to imagine I'm not super knowledgeable about the numbers, but I think that like since Instagram has popped up, I would imagine that there would be just this explosion of the number of people trying to make it in the art world or trying to make art and share it.
I think there is. I 1,000% think that like it's kind of like the like all of a sudden, I mean, like even people I know who I worked with in the past who I didn't even know they were really even remotely into art. Like now they're on Instagram and they're like doing like they're doing their own comic book and stuff like that. And so I'm like, I think there's a huge explosion of people who are on it, and I think there's kind of like in its own way, I think there's like kind of um, all of our like the influences right now are now kind of global,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like certain art trends are now global. They're not just like the Philly art scene or the New York art scene or something like that.
Yeah,
Everything's so connected now that um, it all kind of starts, like starts connecting. Um,
for sure.
that's such a redundant statement.
No, no, it's all good.
Like, but it's like, yeah, it's like that's kind of like that is a really cool, interesting thing, and I'm curious how like art historians will look back on it too. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think that like historians in general will look back on the internet as like the I mean, I don't even know what it could be compared to, but there's the modern philosopher. I think I'm pretty almost 100% sure he's dead now, but Marshall McLuhan, do you know him?
no, I don't.
His kind of tagline was that the media is the message rather
Mhm.
than like the message coming through the media. The media itself is sort of like indicative of what kind of culture it will create. Like, and that technology actually is like upstream from culture and civilization, where like,
Mhm.
so we live in this internet technology world, which is, it like demands participation. It's communal, it's, more than communal, global, like, and it's bound, like very boundary dissolving. Um, I don't know what my point was with that, but it's kind of just to illustrate that, like, we can't talk about art, I guess, without talking about technology and or media, right? Like first we had spoken word, obviously.
Mhm.
Then we had the written word, which was like a form of technology with like single sheets of either paper or chiseled in the stone or whatever. But then like the printing press came, and McLuhan's argument was sort of something like that culture that that technology created was sort of like this one point perspective culture, where like the the person writing the book, like one person writing the book, and then um, radio and television sort of became more of like an oligarchy, like writing the narrative and programming people's minds. And then now the internet is just like blown everything just so wide open, and you have like, a 7 billion point perspective sphere of culture or whatever. And
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's like that sort of stuff is very wild to think about, and it's always like funny because it's like you think about like digital artists, like for instance, speaking of like technology,
yeah,
right? This whole thing with NFTs, right?
right.
And I was like, at the beginning of it, I was like, yeah, that is really cool because finally, like digital artists have the opportunity like ascribe like more like monetary value out of what they have rather than mass production of the image that they make, you know?
Right.
But then it's kind of like, you know, we're like, it's the emperor's clothing, where it's like a little bit of like, well, is this gift really worth like, you know, a couple thousand? Like, I don't like, I can't wrap my head around that, because I'm like, this is it's by virtue of it being digital, it's infinitely replicable.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I mean, what it's all about provenance in that scene. I got real into it. I didn't, and I still haven't actually even made like a NFT of my art. But we did do an NFT of this podcast several episodes ago. But yeah, the whole thing there is like, it's like, you know how sometimes there'll be old paintings and people will be like, oh, this is a lost Caravaggio painting or something. And then it turns out that actually, no, it's not. Like, now the idea is that the provenance will never disappear. You know what I mean? Like, and you'll be able to trace it all back to the original thing, even though it will be replicable. It's like, it won't have the, you know, it's like getting a print with a certificate of authenticity or whatever.
yeah.
And I honestly, like, I could probably do some brushing up on the NFT space because I don't know exactly where it's currently at. But one thing I do know is that I'm getting a lot of DM requests from people being like, we're about to drop our alien NFTs. And it's like, you know, 500 8-bit, you know, they're doing like the CryptoPunks thing, if you're familiar with that. But they're trying to do their own CryptoPunks. So, I mean, there's definitely like a lot of, you know, manipulating the market, just like in the art world.
Exactly, in the art world.
Yeah.
It's all like smoke and mirrors kind of too.
Yeah.
Like,
totally.
That's the thing about like the banana, like the whole banana thing. It's like somebody bought that because it's like, yes, they get to say, I'm the guy who spent $40,000 on the banana thing that made it all over the news, right?
Right.
To some degree, with like NFTs, you can be like, yeah, like I've got people stuff, you know, like not to downplay his by any stretch of the imagination.
Right, his stuff's great, but you know, I think that's what we're doing, right? Like, as artists, it was put really well to me once, that like, we're not selling the art, we're selling the buyer on a version of themselves with this art hanging in their house. You know what I mean? It's like, it's kind of like you're selling status, or you're selling a daily experience of like having a painting in your home that you really enjoy. And I think that that's a more accurate take than saying like, oh, we're selling, you know, marks on a canvas, or pixels on a screen, or whatever it is, you know?
Yeah. 100%. Because I mean, like, at the end of the day, art is like it's like a luxury item, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
But I mean, like, one of the things I do remember hearing somebody talk about, like, you know, speaking of provenance, was like the idea of like using art, right? Like using like an NFT as a way to be like, you know, that's like sort of your certificate of authenticity. And then like the token like that you get is like actual, you know, thing, you know, you also get a painting. And that was like a like something that like I heard somebody talk about that as like a theory of like something you could do with actual like physical paintings and NFTs.
Yeah, definitely. Like, you can, like, if you buy, let's say someone buys the NFT, they would get that digital token. But like, if it was a physical painting, you could be like, well, okay, I'll include the physical painting with the token, you know? And yeah, I mean, that's a nice way for guys like us who make physical paintings to sort of be like, yeah, we're relevant in this space too, you know?
Yeah. Because I feel like I only heard about it too late, and I feel like it's really there. You know, there's a lot that's kind of involved with it. So like, I don't know enough about it. I have a friend who tried it, but I don't think I have particularly like a large enough following that it would really make sense for me. I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the conclusion I came to. Plus, it would be like a lot of work on my plate to figure out, like, out of respect for the people in the digital space who are making, damn near full on virtual environments. Like, I would at least want to take one of my paintings and like do something funky with it. Like, I see a lot of stuff on your Instagram page where it's sort of moving, or like it's doing this cool like cut, something like that. And so for me, it was kind of like time involved in like learning After Effects or even Illustrator, like just doing all those things. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting space, and I think it's just another way to sell art. I will say though that okay, so I saw this one tweet the other day where someone made some crappy NFT or whatever. They put it up on OpenSea, Super Rare, something like that, and they bought it with their own stash of Ethereum or whatever for $100K worth of Ethereum, right? And then they turned around and they sold it for $30K, and they were, in the language of the tweet was something like, yeah, I did this, and this sucker thought that he was getting a 70% discount. And so there's a lot of things like that going on.
But that's like kind of like, like the art market where it's like, a person who's like an art collector who's also like on the board at MoMA. And then they're like,
yeah.
You know what? I got a lot of this guy's stuff hanging out around in here, and I'm kind of a board member, so I think that this should go in the museum now.
Yeah.
And my personal collection of that artist stuff has risen, the value of that has risen exponentially.
Right. Yeah,
It's
there's a lot about the like high-end gallery art world that I'm still blind to, because I don't think I've really come over that horizon. But from all accounts of people who are who are sort of like adjacent or near that, it's like it's pretty weird.
Yeah, it's because I had a friend who worked at MoMA,
Mm-hmm.
and they worked with one of like the curators and basically like putting together like, like they were like coming up with like how to do the language to describe art in a better way at MoMA instead of making it so what's the word I'm looking for, just without it like feeling like it's so self-important.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, man, it's like, it's so strange there. It's like, like you have, it's exact, like he's like, it's just this weird Byzantine politics that kind of happens behind the scenes at these big museums, and they're huge institutions, and the people getting their own stuff from their personal, like, their personal collections put in there, and like that's how they're inflating the prices, and that affects blue chip gallery prices for this artist now, and all this stuff, and it just seems so strange. There's a really good documentary too on Netflix about it.
What's it called?
I'm trying to remember what it was called. It was like, saw it in like, I want to say 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Was it The Price of Everything, maybe?
Mm-hmm.
I think that was
I've heard of that. I don't know if I've actually seen it. I'll check it out.
I think it was the Price of Everything. And it's just it's so strange because, like then you like kind of realize that it's, it's its own weird little thing, because it's also like there's nothing else like art to be like, here's this piece of wood with some, pigment that I pushed around with some like ferret hairs on a stick.
Yeah.
And it's a couple $1,000 because I said it is.
Yeah. Exactly.
And it's like, it's the weird circular thing. It's like, well, someone paid that, so then it is worth that.
Right.
It's so weird. It's this weird self-perpetuating thing, because like, it could be absolutely worthless to somebody else. Like I never understood, like if somebody buys a painting and then, because they talk about that in terms of like, like your prices. What are your prices for your work?
Mm-hmm.
And like it's not a good idea to like overprice your work
Right.
and then like come down, because then it's like anybody who's bought your stuff in the past, it's like,
It's going to be kind of salty about that.
yeah. And then,
Yeah.
and also like kind of like, oh wait, and also like the thing that I bought, maybe it's not worth as much as it's supposed to be. Like I don't understand, you know what I mean? I wouldn't like, I don't think I would care terribly much if like one of the paintings I bought off of somebody, like they're like selling it for a couple $100 less. Not that I'm buying like $1,000 paintings or anything like that. I buy small stuff.
Yeah.
But like, I don't think I would care, because it's like, that's not why I bought it. I bought it because I love the art.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Like I have a couple friends who do run like smaller galleries, and advice they give to people, just on the side, I guess, is is only buy it if you love it. Like, don't buy it because you're trying to flip it, because
Yes.
I mean, you never know, like, and also like if you love it, chances are like if you're buying it for that reason, chances are there's a greater chance of it blowing up, quote unquote, right? Because you're not like, oh, this artist's hot right now,
Right.
this artist is hot. I'm gonna take this 3 months down the line. I'm gonna flip it. Like that's
Yeah.
it's not the mindset.
No, it's like I could never really wrap, because I only started like heard about these guys who like buy speculatively in the mid 2000s. I worked for an artist. His name was Lane Twitchell, and he was doing these like really, they're super trippy. He would do these like, it was almost like a snowflake. You fold paper a bunch of different ways, and then you cut out into it, and then when you open it, it's all symmetrical. And I worked with him as an assistant, and he was selling and showing in a lot of like Chelsea galleries and stuff like that. I think one of them, I remember like one of them was in the old Playboy building, and I vaguely remember being in that building before or after he was at that gallery, and I think that was like the first time I'd seen Cause.
Yeah.
His what does he call his little characters? They're his companions.
Companions, yes.
Yeah, he had his companions in there, and it was like, this is like 2006, I want to say, or something like that. But anyhow, he was like, Lane was telling me, and like part of one of his paintings, it was like he had one of them, I remember, because it's like he did like within each, hard to describe, but we would cut out these like little tiny scenes into the paper. I remember one of them was like, it was like if I remember correctly, it was like a bunch of boxes, and it looked sort of like, in Indiana Jones, where there was like all of the at the end of Indiana Jones, there's all those crates in this big warehouse space.
Yeah.
He did a scene kind of like that, and it was sort of about how like art goes into these like art storage, and I was like, what the hell is that? And he's like, oh yeah, like out in New Jersey, a bunch of these like rich dudes who buy these paintings, they don't put them up in their house. He's like, they buy them and they store them, and they put them in like this, like temperature controlled space out in like, out in
Newark,
New Jersey.
Yeah,
out in Newark somewhere. And I was like, what? And he's like, oh yeah, like that. Like I was so blind and oblivious to this, because I was like in art school at the time, so I was like, I didn't know any of that.
Right.
It was just so mind blowing to me that was like a thing. But I learned so much from being an art assistant with him, in terms of just like, even as a business, like, he always saw himself as like this is like his studio was his factory, and he was like, like when he had like me and maybe like one other assistant, and then like when we were getting close to a show, he'd have like 2 other assistants there, and we're like, working till all hours of the night, finishing up all these different paintings. They were big. They were like 6x6 or something like that, 5x5.
Yeah, it's interesting, the variance in how people view art, from the artist to the collector. I just make it because, like, A, I'm not really great at anything else, and B, I love it. those are
Yeah.
kind of the two main reasons. And I've met a lot of great friends through making art too. So, but yeah, like I guess if things really took off, I could see myself doing the whole Andy Warhol thing, like factory style. But it seemed like it wouldn't be as fun. I don't know.
No, it's weird
I'm
because
not
it's like
sure.
yeah, like one of my friends, I think he knew somebody who like basically like hires out a bunch of the artist assistants for like Murakami, and
Mm,
he was like, yeah, like, and it's like I get it with somebody like Murakami because it's like I could see him very easily like kind of it's such a strong and distinct. It's a brand, you know,
for sure, 100%. Yeah.
and I could definitely see how that would maybe work for him better. I don't think I would like it because I would love, like how do you like we got into this because we like making art, not because we like to tell other people how to make our art,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
like that's not why any of us got into it. But like yeah, and also I had another friend who I think he's not in art anymore, but he was like he was an assistant. I want to say it was for Chuck Close,
Oh, nice.
and because I remember that was like I mean his situation is different obviously because he was not able to really like he wasn't mobile anymore,
Right. 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 Right.
But that's it's always interesting because it's like all of these like big artists they have like a lot of like that's the other part of it
They have a
too.
lot of
It's like
help.
they have a lot of help because otherwise how are you going to get this stuff out? Like if you look at any of these old like I forget I was watching this one documentary. It's this guy. His last name is Waldy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, British guy. He does these really great
Oh
like
yeah. Yeah.
documentaries. BBC.
He did the one on the Impressionists, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I was watching
so
one that was
cool.
on like the Rococo. He did one on that. I love his stuff. And but like it was so interesting because you see these artists though, like back then, that they would be like, I mean, when they're talking a huge painting, and you're like, I mean, it's gigantic,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they're like prolific. They just like so many paintings, and you're just like, and then they had assistants. That's why because there was like an
Right.
apprenticeship thing.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was also kind of part of how that worked back then. That's so cool. Like that's kind of interesting, but I
Yeah.
don't.
I mean, I guess for like sort of if you're doing paintings that huge, sort of like the grunt work of stretching, gessoing, sanding, that would be nice to have a couple people to help
Oh my
out
god.
with. And like with this podcast, I have my friend helping me out on video editing, which which is just great. I mean, I love it. It's such a time saver, you know. So I guess I
Yeah.
could see like how if there's things that would save you time, and you've already accomplished a whole lot. Like when I found out, I was way younger, but I found out that Dali had like a like basically people painting. That one painting is called the hallucinogenic toreador, and it's got like the bust of I forget what it is, but it's a Greek statue with no arms, and it
Mm-hmm.
sort of turns into this man with a tie. And anyway, it's really like the trippiest thing. Still one of the trippiest paintings ever. Um, but yeah, once I found out that how big that painting was and that he had like a bunch of people helping him, I was like, I didn't get it at the time. I was like, really? Like, is it what's up with that? Was he just, like he didn't have help with all his paintings, and someone, gently took me by the shoulder and said, no, like he was in his 60s or 70s at that point, and like it just was conducting from the back, sort of.
Yeah. Like the guy that I was assisting, like the way he described his own paintings, he was like, yeah, like my paintings are not. He was like, almost anybody could do it. It's a very replicable series of steps
Mm-hmm.
to create my art. Only I know though. Like he's like because like he would do the drawing right on a piece of like what's it called tracing paper, And then he would do the drawing, and then he'd be like, we'd tape that to the paper, and he'd be like, okay, now you cut it out. And I'd be like, oh, like whatever. But it was great. But that was the grunt work. And but like, the way he put it though, like he said, it was just like, he's like, it's a bunch of steps that are very simple in a specific order that can it's almost like not mechanized, but like, like, because he's like, because of the simplicity in each step, it comes together in a very complex way, and in a way that only he has the vision for,
right,
kind
right.
of the grand eye for.
Yeah.
But you could like, that was kind of how he rolled with it. I never got to paint any of his things. The most I did was like, obviously, like
Just
he did the
cutting.
drawing, very like tight drawing, and then like I would do the cutting on one of them. But
That must have been a cool experience, though, right? Like, I mean, what an initiation into the art world, kind of. It sounds like.
yeah, no, it was super wild. And I remember there was a lot of things he told me that I was stuck with me. Was like, one of them was like, 'cause I was in illustration at the time, and he was like, because he went to SVA for illustration, and he was like, yeah, like he was like, I went someplace, I won some award for an illustration, and I went to this award reception, and he was like, it was kind of like in the middle, like it was like in some hotel lobby, like it was in like some event space at like a hotel. It was very small. There was no one there, and no one cared. And he was like, do you want to do that with illustration? He's like, at an art show, you've got an art opening. You get to talk to other artists. You get to talk to people who are trying to buy the art. You get to talk to everybody. And he's like, you get to like, there's this energy from it. He's like, why would you want to just like basically work almost anonymously as an illustrator? No one like,
right.
like, like other than people who are illustrators. He was like, yeah, like it's not as, people don't know you for who you are as much, I guess.
Right. Yeah, but I guess even that's changed, taking it back to the whole Instagram thing. Like, people at like Comic-Con have their, like, each artist has a booth, and they're like signing stuff all day, and like drawing little caricatures of people all day long. And yeah, it's just interesting.
That's all blurred now.
Yeah. Well, Michael, it's been great talking with you, man. We've almost done 2 hours here. At the end, usually I ask for some advice that you would give younger artists. What kind of words of inspiration, perhaps?
I think if there's like anything that I would tell younger artists is to not be too hard on themselves. I think it's a matter of like, and I've said this before, where it's kind of like, and I only see it now in retrospect, that you always get to a painting and then you get kind of frustrated with it because it didn't live up to your expectations.
Yeah.
It's kind of, all that is just a snapshot of where you are, and that's a stepping stone, and it's just part of your progression. And even if you get a painting that you really like, don't get too precious with it, because to be honest with you, like, you're gonna get better, and then you're gonna look back on that other painting, and then you're gonna be like, man, what was I seeing in that?
Oh yeah.
So it's kind of, I think it's just to appreciate it for the moment and enjoy it for what it is, and then just know that it's definitely a stepping stone to you getting better, and just to be patient with it. I think that would probably be my advice.
Nice.
And always be nice to people. And be nice. Always be nice.
Oh yeah. That's just good life advice,
Yeah.
Yeah. Always be kind. Well, Michael, thank you so much, man. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Real quick, tell people where they can find you on the old Instagram and maybe your website if you want.
Yeah. My Instagram is mcamarra, and that's MCAMARRA, and that's Instagram at mcamarra. And then my website is mdcamarra.com. It's same, M as in Mike, D, and then Camarra, CAMARRA.com.
Very nice. Michael Camarra, y'all, thank you so much, man. And thanks everybody for listening. We'll check you next time.
Yep.
Thank you again for listening to another episode of Artsy AF Podcast. If you are interested in supporting the Patreon, that address is patreon.com/ArtsyAF Podcast. And I want to thank all my patrons. You guys keep this engine running. I couldn't do it without you. Go over there and check out the tiers I have available. It includes video, guest suggestions, patron-only posts, and some merchandise. Thank you again for listening. Please rate, review, subscribe. Do all those little things that help get Artsy AF into the consciousness of more and more people. Yeah.